Thanks everyone for coming to this session about content type and task in SharePoint and Nintex Workflow, and actually Nintex products in general. My name is Majid Sahib. I've been working with Nintex for the last four and a half years. I have been working with the support team as a technical service engineer. I have seen many issues with customers and partners about the usage of content type with Nintex and SharePoint. You will hear about the content type concept in our product more often because it's a very powerful concept in SharePoint, and I would like you guys to have a good look at it and see what you can do with a content type in Nintex product. So once you know about the content type, you will find it's very useful and very powerful to use in your design, either a form or a workflow. So the importance of content type, you will find out that it's more flexible and it will manage your metadata very nicely in your design. So let's get started. A bit about myself. I've been working with SharePoint since 2007 flavor, then 2010 and 2013. Right now I'm 365. On the background, I am ASP.NET developer, and eventually I became a SharePoint developer. Then I touched on the content management system applications. All in all, 15 years old in an IT experience. Okay, so today, what are we gonna see? Our agenda will be content type, what is it in terms of SharePoint. Then we will see how we use it in Nintex product. And then we're gonna touch of what could go wrong and how can we go around it. How can we avoid it in the first place if something went wrong. And the same thing, we're gonna touch on the task. The task, what is a task from SharePoint point of view. Then we're gonna go on Nintex side of things. Then we're gonna do the same thing for task. How can we avoid having a task issues, and how can we solve it if we have that issues inherited from the system? We will go around best practices, then what is the way of troubleshooting, then we'll give you some space for questions. Okay. The reason I put that slide here first, because I wanted, before I start on this one, okay, let's go backward. That let me in, but doesn't, sorry. I was expecting this to be an end user to business analyst and designers. Are you like in that arena? Are you all end users, workflow designers? Or there's, yep, good. And business analyst? Good, perfect. And end users? Perfect. So we'll find from end user's point of view, you'll find it very helpful for you because you might understand in advance what could happen wrong. And you can say, oh yeah, content type. Oh yeah, that's a task issue. Okay, so that will be good also practice for you. Okay. This bit of technical, high technical, but I don't want you to memorize it, but just to give you a very quick what's happening behind the scene. So if we look at from the bottom here, then we're gonna go up. So the bottom is the core of Microsoft SharePoint, okay? The end user is from here, this point. This is the end user point of level. So only he see that the form is here. Then things flow down into SharePoint and Microsoft Workflow engine, then till reach the core of Microsoft SharePoint. So if you are a little bit on technical side of things, we work, SharePoint itself work on the .NET framework. So that's how things started from here. Then we have the workflow engine, which is under SharePoint on-prem. It is on the same box or the same context of SharePoint itself. On 2013 and 365, it's a different story. Microsoft have separated that service into a separate service, so does not apply here. Then we have what we call the SharePoint object model, which we'll call the SharePoint engine. Then we have the end user, which is gonna click, approve, reject. So this is how things flow down. If you are an end user, all you have to worry about this page. This is the approve reject page. And behind the scene, this is happening. So what could go wrong? Any part of this could make a task is not approved or a outcome is not exactly what could happen on the click. That image or that hierarchy is coming from that SharePoint link. So it's always there. I put the links. Okay, so let's go to the content type directly. What is a content type? Content type basically is a logical place where you can hold your metadata. Some people say, okay, is my metadata only my columns? Only like I create a list, then I add columns, then I can add my different type of metadata. Well, it could be the same, but you always can have a workflow attached to a content type, and you can have a kind of like behavior or a form behind that content type. So if you think about content type as like a box, and you can add, let's say, columns or data type to that box, okay? But you still, at the same time, can attach different things to that box, then you can run it in SharePoint. So that's what is content type is all about, okay? We'll see in different. But from experience, SharePoint content type is your best friend in SharePoint. So if you start to learn SharePoint, have a look at the concept of content type because it's going to help you a lot in your form design as an Nintex product or even in workflow design, okay? And even when you go to a list and you have your you have an Excel sheet and you decided to convert that Excel sheet into a SharePoint list, then once people, a lot of people say, okay, I'm going to add 400 columns to my list. But think about it, what's going to happen to that 400 columns into your list if your manager say, okay, I want to put it into another list? Are you going to create another 400 columns on that other list? So content type come to rescue and you say, yep, you can put once your 400 columns on that content type, then you grab that content type, put it into another list, and magically SharePoint will add that 400 columns to the other list. You don't have to create it again. So that's the beauty of content type. Okay. So I'm going to focus on, every time you can see here the icon here. So I'm telling you which environment I'm targeting. So basically, they are both environments. It could be on-prem, it could be on the cloud. So the same scenario. So if you look at that list here, which is invoices library, the columns are there, like you have a due date and company. Okay, these are columns. So there could be different data type. Okay, and this is what we call it columns or metadata. So people will say, okay, I'm going to have a document library. I'm going to create a columns on that document library. All you have to do, go document library, settings, create a column, off you go. So what we have seen in SharePoint added something called side columns. So side columns basically is that instead of creating the column on a list level, you can go up one level, which is your site, and create your columns there on that site. And SharePoint will make that columns flow down to your subsite and to the list under that site. So that's what is a side column. So it's reusable. But if you create the column directly on that list, it is on that level. It's not reusable into another list, another site. So stick on the bottom of that leaf. Okay, and in SharePoint, you can create a content type. There is a site gallery, content type gallery. There we go and create your content type. So this concept is coming from that page from Microsoft. So if you wanted to get familiar with what is a content type in SharePoint, there's heaps of useful things in MSDN, Microsoft. You can have a look and go. Because content type as a concept is a huge concept, but it's not very complicated. You can easily manage how to use it. Okay. As we said, that the way you create a content type, create a column is that you go to your list or document library, create a column, and you'll be presented by data type you can choose from. Okay. The column, if you create it, as we said, on the level of the list of the library, is stored on that level. It's not somewhere else. When you go create a list view, you will have a list of columns. You can choose from there, and you can decide which columns can appear on your view. Of course, as we know, in SharePoint, you have a list view threshold, and you can control how many lookup will be having in action between lookup queries and between lists. Okay. As you can see, the content type is in the middle here. So this is the what we're talking about, content type. And you can attach to that one, you can attach a workflow, you can attach a side column, libraries, and of course we have a document management policy. And of course you can have more than one document library using the same content type. So if I have a workflow here attached to that content type, it will be automatically applied to that document library and that document library. The same goes for the columns. Okay, the difference between side columns and list columns is that side columns are reusable. So if I create it on the top side, okay, then eventually that column, side column A, okay, it will be eventually coming to the subsides. So that's how it works. It flows down from top to the bottom. But if I create it on that level, okay, which is side column B, it's only going to flow down here. It's not going to appear on that level. So when you start designing and you say, okay, I want that invoice column to appear on every subsite from now on, then you have to go up one level so it can flow down. And when we go to the size settings, we have that create button, and you can create it from here. So size settings, columns, and create. Okay, how many people of you have heard about the Content Type Hub? Perfect. So the Content Type Hub concept was introduced in 2010, SharePoint 2010. And basically the idea is that in 2007, we didn't have the ability to say, okay, this is a site collection, and I would like to have the same content type that I created on other site collection to come to another site collection. So it was kind of like a site collection boundary. We couldn't get it. So we have to do it manually. With the introduction of the Content Type Hub concept in 2010, we easily can create a site collection, and that site collection will be your source. So every content type, I will create it on that Content Type Hub site collection, and every subsite who want to have that same content type, all you have to do is subscribe to that Content Type Hub site collection, and automatically, wherever you create on that Content Type Hub, it will automatically flow down to the other site collection, which is on different levels, right? So that's working fine, no problem. But when we have so the migration is one thing, but when you have a workflow, so as we said that you can create a workflow against a content type. In Nintex, we call it Reusable Workflow. Okay? How many people have used the Reusable template workflow in Nintex? Good? Good? Okay, so how can we go with that? If I have a content type, I have an Nintex workflow attached to my content type, okay? And I want to move my content type from that site collection to another site collection. So how that will work? Because of that many times, like we have seen this issue, the best approach for that is this guy from Microsoft. This link from Microsoft is the best approach I have seen that will allow you to make the workflow attached to content type to flow with the content type and continue to work on that other site collection. Okay? So I provided the link here, but what does Microsoft say? It's saying that when you have a content type workflow, you have to export that workflow or use it as a solution. Okay? Where do we have it in Nintex? As you can see here, we have provided a button here under the export. Say export to Visual Studio, okay? So you haven't seen this button before. You can use it right now if you have a content type hub terminology in your farm. So when you have a site reusable template as a workflow, then you know that you're going to give it to another site collection, export that workflow by this as a WSP. WSP stands for the SharePoint solution, which you can put it onto your solution gallery. Okay. Once you export it as a solution gallery, add it to your solution gallery, then install and activate your solution. Once you activate your solution, SharePoint will add it to your feature. So for example, if I have an Nintex workflow called My Workflow, then you will have a new feature called My Workflow under your site. You go ahead and activate that feature. Automatically, you will go to the, I'll show in a minute in the demo, that you go to the workflow settings page and your My Workflow is there. You can have it. This is a template for you. So in your case, if you are migrating, okay, then what you can do, export all your workflows using this button here as WSP. Then you will have a bunch of solutions into your farm, into your site. Activate these features. Then on the site you are trying to migrate to or overwrite or copy that, then you activate that feature on that site. It will appear on your workflow settings page. Then you can add an instance for that template. Okay. I have seen many attempts of how to use that one, but this is the best solution I have seen that is working all the time. Okay. So that's workflow with Content Type Hub. Okay. The first page, when you start designing a reusable workflow against a content type, the first element you can see is choose your content type. And this is where we have it here. Okay, see that here? I'm not sure if it's clear enough. But the first thing by default is all. All is basically the system settings for the content type. So what we recommend is that you don't use the all or the item content type, because these two things, two content type, are the base of every content type in your SharePoint. So if you add a workflow against these content type, then you are telling SharePoint to put a workflow against every content type in your system. Okay? So that's because every content type will inherit from that item or the system content type. Very clear enough? Okay. Do I have to repeat it again? In 4 years, I have only seen 2 cases that people went ahead and changed the system content type. And they said, whoops, it's not working. Nothing is working. I cannot design, I can't create, I can't do anything with Nintex. Okay. I look deep and I see that they have changed the item content type, or they change the document content type. Okay? If you have to touch the system content type, all you have to do, inherit from the base content type, which is I call it the base content type, and create your own custom content type name, and eventually use that content type and change it, modify it, do whatever you like. But whatever you do, don't touch the base or the system content type. That will break your system and eventually will break any application which is like Nintex product on your farm. What we have in Nintex as a product, Nintex workflow, I'm talking about, by the way, on-prem, okay? We have added a group, we call it the Nintex workflow, obviously, and in that group, we have the Nintex content type. It's not very clear, but you got the idea that where you can get it. The question is, how this content type gets created? How did they come to the system? Part of your installation as an end user is part of your installation that you go to the site feature and you activate Nintex workflow features. Once you click the activate, behind the scene, we create all these columns and content type for you. Okay? You don't have to worry about them, but the thing is what happened when people do migration, we have seen a lot of issues around the migrations tools. Okay? They can give you duplicate content type of Nintex, okay? And they can give you like missing column or added a new column or a few things there. So what is suggested is that when you have migration, try to have a comparison between a new site collection with Nintex features and compare the content type to the imported or the migrated site and see what's the difference in terms of content type and columns. And that's how you can get what could happen wrong during the migration. Okay. We have a nice blog here from our community, nintex.com, basically telling you all the content type GUID numbers for our Nintex workflow and even forms. That link should allow you to see all these for Nintex content type. Okay, we have, when you create a workflow, okay, same like in concept as a SharePoint Designer workflow, we have created a hidden library called Nintex Workflows. Every site you have activated Nintex on, that library will be created for you, okay? As we said, a library will read or communicate with the content type. That library will have a few columns, extra columns, that we save our Nintex workflows. When you create a Nintex workflow, it will come to this library, Nintex Workflows, under your site, okay? And within that, every workflow will have a folder. So these are workflows, names, okay? And behind every folder, there is either 2 files or 3 files, depending if you are using a task action. And this is what we call the definition, the workflow definition files. So if you have any problem with a workflow in the designer, you can come here to that library, double check that your workflow is still there as a file. If it's there, there is no problem. We can help you how to get that workflow inside your designer again. But the concept of this document library, with migration again, when you migrate, things could go wrong, and even you cannot open an existing workflow. So when we check the Nintex workflow library, during migration, something corrupted on the columns that Nintex has created during the feature activation. So what we do, we create another site, activate the feature, we have a brand new Nintex workflow library, we copy it over, and that will fix your issue, okay? Very important that the content types, they are not created in Nintex database, okay? Content type is a SharePoint concept. That means it will be saved and managed in the SharePoint content database, okay? We discussed the reusable Nintex workflows. Okay, with Nintex forms, kind of like the same scenario. We have also here, we have a library. When you activate the feature of Nintex forms, we have a library called Nintex Forms. And with Nintex Forms, we save all the forms that you have designed. So every form you have designed against a content type or a list, it will be saved on that library. Nintex Forms as a product is a content type oriented. So that means when you design a form, if you have multiple content type in your list or library, you can have the option which content type you would like to have the forms against it. Because it's going to look at your columns on that content type and bring it to the forms, and you can see it in the designer. Okay? When you click Save and Publish, then the Nintex Form Designer will come to this hidden library and put all your forms on this library. So these, let's say the GUID here is representing the content type. Okay? And again, Nintex forms are not saved into Nintex Nintex database. It's basically saved on SharePoint side, which is this library. Okay? So you can't get Nintex forms out of Nintex database. You can get it out of this library. And one point I have seen many times is that people will have 400 columns on their list, and they trying to make a Nintex form against that list. Of course, you will hit a performance issues because of that. So what we recommend that you try to split your 400 columns into content type so that Nintex form can easily manage your form. Always remember, when you are designing Nintex forms, always use the concept of content type in your design. What about 365? Okay, on 365, the usage of content type is basically when you have a task action. So when you have a task action and you say, okay, I'm gonna create an outcome on a task, then the outcome of the task is gonna be created as a content type, okay? Because of the Azure and the cloud technology, we don't have access to the database, so we use the content type concept to create the outcomes. Again, very important message is don't try to edit the content type that was created by Nintex. If you look at the content type on 365, okay, the message is very clear under the description. This is only for Nintex workflow usage, okay, and should not be changed, altered. Okay. Now, when we run through the issues that we have seen, on migration issue, when you try to migrate, what we have seen is that on the destination side, they cannot activate the Nintex features. Then what that means that the content type has already been activated on the source site collection. What we recommend that you go to the destination before migration, activate Nintex features, that will add your content type, then do the migration. As we can see that the sixth one is the duplicate columns. Okay, we have seen it with many times when people do with third-party migration tools. What we recommend is using we have a documentation about how to do the migration, but if you choose to go to the third migration, make sure that you activate before, then do the copy over using the migration tool. A lot of migration tools has been adapted to our Nintex content type, so nowadays we see less and less of that issues at the moment. Okay, I have been seeing a lot of people looking at, say, okay, when I edit an item, I see a very slow latency time. The reason for this, when you created a Nintex workflow, reusable content type workflow, you choose either all or item, and that forces to have a workflow on every content type on your system. So when we have a content type, if you are technical enough, we have event receivers, and these event receivers will slow down your modification of the item. So that's a big no. When don't you choose, like, don't be attempt to say yes, go next. Just look at the content type and choose your correct content type. Okay. Go to the task concept. And there's a lot of things here. I wanted to list it all. So basically, what is a task? A task basically is a job you have to do, and the higher management would like to see your progress, and this is what a task physically is. But in terms of SharePoint, it's basically just an item added to a task list type, okay? The task list will have its own also content type, and the workflow engine will use that as part of the nature of the workflow engine. It's basically go into the workflow task list because it want to add a task action to that one. We have a lot of utilities, how to look for tasks. We have a camel queries and the PowerShell script to look for the columns in the task list. Okay, of course you can add Nintex forms behind on the task action and you say, yep, I want to edit my task into Nintex forms, okay? One thing I want to tell about, when you create a workflow and you edit a task in a Nintex task form, then what will happen that the list we show you just Nintex forms, okay? If you have a task form, then that content of that task is not within that hidden list. It's gonna be embedded inside the workflow. So everything you see on the task form, it will be inside your workflow when you export it, okay? The nature of the SharePoint workflow engine does not run step by step and continue. It will take a breath, you know, dehydrate, rehydration, and it will save the state of the workflow and the SharePoint content database. And that's why the task, when they're created, they are created in both areas. It's Nintex database plus the SharePoint content database. And when you do migration, you have to take a backup and sync between Nintex and SharePoint. because there is two information, one in SharePoint content and one in Nintex content database. Okay. If you are familiar with the hosts that run the workflow timer engine, then you will see that when you have a task in lazy approval, then the SharePoint timer service will kick in and respond to your task. And as we know, tasks can be delegated. That's being assigned to another user to approve, reject the task, or it can be escalated during some time. Okay, we talk about the task outcome. Okay, the task outcome basically is the goal of your task. For example, when your manager say, okay, clean your desk is your task. But to achieve that task, the outcome is to clean the desk. But the task of cleaning the desk could be separated in multitask. Okay, like remove the old computers, plug in, this is task number 1, task number 2, plug in these things, task number 3, do this thing. But the end outcome is cleaning the desk. Okay, so the outcome in the task is basically, it is the trigger that will allow the workflow to continue. The task status is not the trigger. Okay, so when you have a task, you have a task status, you have an outcome, you have a workflow status. Workflow status is relying on the task status. Task status is relying on the outcome. Outcome could be approve, could be reject, could be something else. Okay? And we have also the My Workflow Task web part, which you can see your current login, the task assigned to you. Okay, the content type of the workflow task having a special column is called the workflow instance ID, and that column especially is there from Microsoft SharePoint to understand that this task is related to that workflow. So when that workflow say, okay, I'm going to approve my task, then that column, okay, is very special. It will know which workflow to start from the database and continue. Okay, so that's something you can look in the content type. Okay, and of course we have the definition of the task outcome. This is a photo image from SharePoint Manager, which you can look at the workflow task list, and you can see all the columns available on your content type. Okay. Cool. So very briefly, we're going to go through how did we come with this one. So here under the size settings, okay, size settings, under the Web Designer Gallery, this is 2013, by the way, on-prem. Under these, we have the side columns here. We talk about the side columns and the side content type. When I click on the side content type, under group drop-down, you can see that we have an Nintex workflow group, which can see all the Nintex workflow content type available. Now, when I go to the workflow task list, which is under size settings, site content, then I go to my list of I can see the workflow task list. The workflow task list is available when you have a task action and you create a task assigned to a user. Okay, so the outcome, as we see, is either approve or reject. The outcome will trigger the workflow to continue because it is the ultimate goal for the task. Okay, so it is like a one-to-one relationship. So you have a task status and you have an outcome. Okay, if the outcome is approve or reject, then that will trigger the workflow status to continue to be completed, etc. Okay. What we have in our designer, we have a lot of actions that we can use for our task actions. So we have the status. We talk about the status, complete workflow. Okay, so that will change the status column, which is a very special column in SharePoint, or we can assign that task to someone else with delegation. By the way, it's not enough to change the assigned to column. A lot of people go to the list, to that list. I have seen many people go to that list and say, okay, assign to, all I have to go to that assigned to and give it to another user to finish the task. It doesn't work like that. Because what will happen, as you remember, we have talked that the task information saved in two places. one in SharePoint and one in Nintex. By doing this, you just changed SharePoint. You didn't touch on Nintex database. The way we do it is that we have a delegation button here, or delegation action, which allow you to change both SharePoint and Nintex database, and that's how your task can go to someone else to be delegated. Okay? Then we have request data, which is the one that have the content type. Okay? And we have request review, assign to do task, and the very special one is the assign flexi task. My recommendation, if you can, as much as you can, use the assign flexi task action. Okay? It have a lot of flexibility and a lot of the way how to manage your task there. And of course, we have the previous version of flexi task, which is the request approval, which is either can approve or decline. With the flexi task, you can have as much as you can as an outcome, and you have escalation, etc. Okay. Right, so what could go wrong in task? Very good question about when they go migration. I did my migration. I have a running workflows into my source. I migrated. I cannot approve it anymore. So what happened? People does not take SharePoint and Nintex database in sync when they do the backup. So there is a difference between data. So we recommend that you follow the recommendation in our migration document. Very famous error always the time, which is task get locked. Like you try to approve a task and it's just not allow you. There is a lot of many reasons for that. The famous one, which is that like there is a race between the SharePoint performance, or you can have a serialization. Like when it's time to save the task or the workflow into the database, by the time you want to get it back again, something's go wrong. So what we do, we need to analyze the SharePoint logs to see what's going on. And also one of them is the access denied. So what could happen is that you assign to a task to a person, that person left the company, they remove it from the Active Directory, somebody else wants to assign it, you can't continue the task. So the user permission or user is not in Active Directory. Okay. What we have seen also, the best one to do it is try not to hard code who is the task is assigned to. Okay. So just in case that email, that username is not resolved anymore into the SharePoint. Thank you very much.